Welcome to this brief explanation of the basics of making a reference list in APA for philosophy students. In this brief clip, I will just look at the reference list, so not to the in-text citations, so just at the list at the end of your essay or thesis. I will also take a look at the most common cases for students of philosophy. So it's a very big book, the APA style reference guide, and I'll just look at the most common cases and explain how you put those references in your reference list. So why do this? Well, in an academic text, you need to refer properly to the persons whose work you used. So you do not want to commit plagiarism. So anything that any idea that you get from someone else should be credited to that person or that group of person or that institution or whatever you got the ideas from. So do not present any ideas that are not your own as your own. So that is one reason to provide references in your text and in your and therefore a list at the end of your thesis in this case. Also, you might say something that philosopher X says this and this and this, and then if you put a reference there, your reader can check whether that's actually the case, that this philosopher said that, because it might be something strange or something controversial, and then you want, as a reader, you want to be able to check it. Okay, so and also a reference list, a reference to a paper or a book or something contains usually other references itself to further text. So if your reader wants to explore some more, then such a reference would be a good way to start. So as a general rule, you provide the information in the reference list of the author of the book, the paper, whatever it is, the date when it was published, the title of it, and the source where you got it. I will now discuss APA style, because that's one way of one very common way of referring. Chicago style would be another one. So let's take a look at some common examples of APA style referencing. What I'll do is I'll discuss first the authors, so in general, so the authors of a book or a paper or something like that, and how you refer to them in your reference list. Then take a look at books, pretty common for philosophers, and then papers, also something that's very common. And then with the rise of internet, of course, YouTube is something that is also often used for finding examples or something like that. How do you refer to YouTube? And then there is an example of something that's not really covered in the American Psychological Association publication manual, because it's an American manual, and we're talking about referring to legal texts of courts. So in America, you refer to those in a different way than in Europe. So I've constructed a way to refer in APA kind of style to those legal texts, and that serves as an example for what to do if you do not know, if the publication manual is not very clear how to refer. Then you can construct a way of referencing that is at least coherent with those rules. So coherence of and consistency of referencing is very important. There are many texts and many sources where you can get your information from. So what I'm going to do here is look at the very basics. There are many exceptions and there are many other rules. So there are no dates to the source, or there is no author or something like that. There's also, for instance, a rule how to refer to a PowerPoint presentation. I say do not just do not do that. Just do not refer to any PowerPoint presentation, because PowerPoint presentations usually are on an intranet that is not accessible to the general public, even though many scientific journals also are not accessible because you have to pay, but once you've paid you have access to them, so they are publicly accessible, while those PowerPoints are not, because you have to enroll at a university, for instance. So do not refer basically to course PowerPoints. So make sure that the source is, at least in principle, maybe you have to pay for it, but if you pay for it, it is publicly accessible, so make sure that that is the case. And in our case, it is university. Canvas, for instance, is not publicly available. Let's take a look at what goes first in every reference, and that is the author or authors. So authors usually is pretty straightforward. There is a paper that has an author, then you put the last name of the author as the first part of your reference, and then the initials of their first names. So author A dot, and there is a space between these initials. If you have a second author, then it becomes comma and what you put in between author A and author B. If you have more authors, then it's just a comma, and then mention them in the way they are mentioned on the book title or on the top of the article, and then put the and, of course, just before the last author, and this is up to and including 20 authors. So if it's more, then there's a different rule, but usually that is not the case, right? Books. Right, so you want to refer to a book by one author. So then the rule for the author applies. So you have the last name and the initial of the first name, and then you put the date, the year of publication. So there you use the copyright date. Sometimes, of course, a book has been reprinted. So in 2012, maybe this book also has been reprinted in 2015 with no alterations. Then you use 2012. Even though the one you used is of a couple of years later. Of course, if it's a revised edition, if the author has added something to the book or something like that, then you have then you put that in the reference that it's a second edition, or you and then you put the other year, the later year there, of course. Now, if you take a look at the title, then the entire title is in italics. That's something students tend to forget, to put things in italics, and it is special things have to be put in italics. In this case, it's the entire title of the book, and you put a colon between the title and the subtitle. And so that's what you do. You just write down the entire title, you put a colon between the title and the subtitle, and you start the title as well as the subtitle with a capital letter. And those are the only capitals you use in the sense it's just like a normal sentence. So if this would be a book on the Republic of Plato, I don't know, then Plato, of course, also is with a capital letter. So only the first one and the one after the colon are with capital letters. And then you call this a sentence case, because it's just like with a sentence. We'll take a look at a different case in a moment, where we have more capital letters in the reference. So there's a dot between the year, or the bracket of after the year, and the title, and there's also a dot, a period, at the end of the title, unless, of course, there is already a question mark or something like that in the title. then you use the symbol that's in the title, and you do not add the period. You do not add the dot. Okay, so, and then you'll end with the unabbreviated name of the publisher. So not CUP for Cambridge University Press, but Cambridge University Press. And these days, and that's new compared to the older versions of APA style referencing, the location of the publisher is not provided anymore. So this is basically what you do with a book. Now, as a philosophy student, you will in many cases refer to a book that is a reprint because you do not have the original print of the book. So for instance, if you take a look at David Hume's Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, this is a book that was published in 1779. You probably do not have the money to buy this book because it's really expensive, if you can buy it at all. So then you provide both publication dates. That is, you use the date of the reprint you use. In this case, I have this one in my personal library, Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, published by Penguin Books, and it's published in 1990. And then you put in brackets, you put original work published 1779. And no period there. So that's how you refer to those. So it's basically the same: name of the author, the date of publication, in this case of the reprint, and that probably has a different page numbering and stuff like that. Then of course the title and the publisher. So it's basically the same, but now you add original work published and the year of the original publication behind that. And there's no period. There's no dot. So, okay, that might be counterintuitive, but well, these are the rules. Okay, so if you're a native speaker of Dutch and you're writing your thesis in English, then you have loads of sources that are just in Dutch and that you can use. So if you want to refer to a book that's written in Dutch, you refer to the book in the original language in your reference list. And then you provide your own translation into English between square brackets. So in this case, the book is by Bas Jongenelen. So you get the author, the year of publication, the title in Dutch, Abstracte Compositie in wit, then no punctuation mark. So square bracket, abstract composition in white. That's my translation of the Dutch title into English. Then you put the period, and then you say what the publisher is, and that in this case, Uitgeverij Geroosterde Hond. You don't translate that, you just give the name of the publisher. Note that the title, of course, has to be in italics, but the translation, apparently, is not in italics. That's just a rule. I'm not going to say that these rules are coherent and stuff like that, or intelligible. I'm just explaining what the rules are and therefore how your reference list should look like. So if you use a book like this in Dutch that has not been translated into English, this one should be translated into English. It's a very good book. Then you give the translation, your translation in English, between square brackets and not in italics. Of course, you might refer also to a book that has been translated into English from, say, Dutch. Then usually, of course, the translation, unless it's a very famous author, then they publish them at the same time. But usually the translation is of a later date than the publication date of the original. You, again, provide both publication dates. But you do not provide the original title. So if it's a Dutch book, you do not provide the original title because now you have a title that has been translated into English. So you provide information about the translator. That is what you do. So again, you get the author, in this case, Vermette, 2023. That's the publication date of the translation. then you get the translated title. So since Brabant is a name, so the Brabant is with a capital, and the rest, with the exception of course of new, is not. So it's sentence style. New Brabant proverbs, sayings, and aphorisms. It's translated by G.H. Zalms, and it's by Double Ganger Publishing, and then you add the date of the original published work. So that was 2010. So original work published 2010. Again, no period at the end of this reference. Let us continue by looking at papers, and these days papers usually are available online, but of course not always, so you need to know how to refer to hard copies of papers and online versions of papers. Papers follow the same structure, of course. You have the author, the date, the title, and the source. So let's start by looking at a very straightforward publication of a paper in a journal that cannot be found online. Okay, so in this case it is a small paper by Marcel Coppens, published in 1995. It's about Daniel Dennett, 50 Minutes of Fame. So that is a very brief publication. It's published in Boca della Verita. So what you do is similar to a book title, only you do not put it in italics. So you put the title and the subtitle after each other with a colon in between. You use capitals like you use in a sentence, so it's sentence style. So that's basically very much the same, with the exception of the italics. Then you put the journal name after that, and that is in italics. And now words are capitalized according to some rules. So before we look at that, let's take a look at the issue number and the volume number and the page number, how you do that. So you write Boca della Verita, that's the name of the journal, then a comma, which is not in italics. Then there's a volume number that is in italics. And there's an issue number. So volume is usually the year. So it's the 6th year of Boca della Verita, and it's number 1. So it's the first one of that year. And that is not, that's put between brackets, and the brackets and the issue number are not in italics. There's also no space between the volume number and the first bracket. And then you put the page numbers behind that. In this case, it's just 2 pages, so pages 7 through 8. So that's what you do. Now, how are the words capitalized in a journal title? What are these rules? How to do that? So this is called title case. And not sentence, right? So it's not a title that is written as a sentence, because now there are many more capitals in this part of the reference. So the first word of the title gets a capital letter, and the first word after the colon. So that's the same. So you start with a capital letter. But now all major words also get a capital letter, and those are nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, pronouns, and all words of 4 or more letters. So that means that, for instance, by is not capitalized, but with and from are capitalized. When do you use this title case? Well, the titles of periodicals, so of journals, basically. When do you use sentence case? Titles of books, articles, reports, web pages, even if there was capitalization in the original. So if you have a book title that is basically in title case, on the book itself, then you still use sentence case in your reference list. So basically the only time you use title case is for journals, for periodicals. We've just looked at the basics of a paper in a journal. Most journals these days, of course, are also available online, and then you need to add the online location of that particular paper. So, and that depends on where you find it. So if you find a paper that has a DOI, a digital object identifier, you always use that. If there's more, if it also has a URL, so Uniform Resource Locator, then still you use the DOI and only the DOI. So the digital object identifier trumps the Uniform Resource Locator. If it only has a URL, obviously then you provide the URL, and you don't need to add retrieved from or a retrieval date. In previous versions of the APA style, that was recommended that you do that. So now they say you do not do that. So you just put the internet location you found your paper after the regular reference. Note here that because dots are important on the internet, in the digital object identifier or the URLs, that you do not put the period at the end of a DOI or a URL. So basically what you have is a DOI, you put it in the end of the reference, or a URL that you put at the end of the reference. So I think that's pretty straightforward. So it looks like this basically. Of course, these days there are many other sources than books and papers. For instance, there's YouTube. So how do you refer to a source like that? So how do you refer to a YouTube video? What it is, you credit the person or group that uploaded the video. So even though they might not have anything to do with creating the video, you still credit the person or group that uploaded the video, because in this case you want the reference, you want your reader to be able to find the reference, and then you basically try to find a YouTube channel of this person. In this case I chose an example of my colleague Michael, who actually created the content and published this on his own YouTube channel. So you get the person that uploaded the video, then you add the date. In this case there's a specific date, right? So it's not the year 2021 but September 16. It's one of his lectures that he has made publicly available on YouTube. So there are other lectures he published on YouTube with different dates but the same year. So you put the actual date of publication there, and then the name of the video, the cultural evolution of social institutions in this case, and you put between square brackets that it is a video. Then you end that with a dot with a period, and then you say that it's from YouTube, and you end that with a dot, and then you just give the URL of the YouTube clip. So that's how you do that. The last source we will take a look at is that of legal documents in the Netherlands or in Europe. So the A in the APA stands for American, and there are sometimes documents that are very country specific, like legal documents, or sometimes they are specific to a group of countries like the European Union, and then they are not covered in the APA manual. This is an example for how you could go about if you have such a case as, for instance, legal documents. Sometimes there are cultural differences between the US and other parts of the world. In our case, we're talking about Europe, or more specifically the Netherlands. And we have a different legal system, different ways of providing, coming up with legal documents, and therefore a different way of referring to them. So APA does have a chapter on referencing to legal documents, but it says only how you have to refer to American documents. So in American court rulings, for instance, a Roe v. Wade and a famous ruling in abortion legislation. That's not how we can refer to court rulings. So how do we do that? Now, if you look at Dutch rules for Dutch writers of legal documents, then they basically say, well, you have to refer in a footnote to the entire reference, and you do not put the reference in the reference list. But now, if you would do that, then you get two different ways of referring, and consistency is more important than doing it according to this legal Dutch ways of referencing, because then you have one way of referencing for the legal documents and another way for the others. So if you encounter something like this, in this case it's the Dutch court rulings you want to refer to, but there might be other cultural differences between APA and what you want to refer to. Make sure you come up with something that is very similar to the APA rules. Usually, of course, there is some instance that rules. So, example, the Supreme Court, the Hoge Raad, or a regular court, the rechtbank. So that is what you put first. And you do that in the abbreviated form. So if there is a court document you want to refer to that is by the Parquet by the Hoge Raad, that becomes PHR. So that's the first part of your reference then. There's a complete list of all the abbreviations on rechtspraak.nl. Then you put the date according to APA rules, so the year and the date of the court document. So in this case, I came up with an example of 2023, August 29. And then you put the European case law identifier behind it. So ECLI, and that consists of the abbreviation for European case law identifier, and then two letters that code for the country, in this case the Netherlands, then the court code, in this case it's the Parquet by the Hoge Raad, PHR, then the year of the decision, in 4 digits, not in 2, in 4 digits, and then there is a unique identifying number that it has a maximum of 25 characters, and that may include dots. In this case, it's just a number 742. Now, since there is in these legal documents, the title usually is the European case law identifier, and it doesn't say ruling in the case of blah blah versus blah blah or something like that. You don't have a separate title that you put in the reference. So basically you have the author, that is the instance that rules, the publication date, including the month and the day, and then the European case law identifier. So anyone that wants to check whether you have cited correctly or something like that, or whether you have paraphrased correctly, can find it by basically using this European case law identifier. So, and then you have something that you could also put in your reference list.
That's it. I hope this was helpful. Stay safe.